The Zephyrian High Command chamber hummed with the low thrum of advanced technology, its crystalline walls pulsing with bioluminescent data streams. Admiral Kethvor's 6 eyes scanned the holographic display floating before him, showing a small blue planet on the outer rim of what the primitives called the Milky Way. The planet's designation in their files was simple: Sol 3, inhabited by a species that had barely achieved interplanetary travel. Another primitive world, Admiral, reported Subcommander Yixnel, her tentacles dancing across the control interface with practiced efficiency. The inhabitants call themselves humans. They've only just reached their own satellite and have sent crude probes to nearby planets. Their technology level registers at approximately 2.3 on the Kardashev scale. Kethvor's mandibles clicked in amusement. The Zephyrians had achieved interstellar travel 3 millennia ago and had conquered 47 systems with little resistance. Most species either surrendered immediately upon witnessing their technological superiority or were quickly overwhelmed by their plasma weaponry and shield technology. These humans would be no different. What are their primary weapons? The Admiral inquired, already knowing the answer would be laughably primitive. Kinetic projectiles, Admiral. Metal slugs propelled by chemical explosions. Some nuclear capabilities, but limited to planetary surface use. Most interesting are their, how do they say it, pointed sticks that they thrust or throw at enemies. They call them spears and arrows. Yixnel's translator struggled with the concepts, as if the words themselves were too archaic to process properly. The entire command crew erupted in what passed for laughter among the Zephyrians, a harmonic whistling sound that echoed through the chamber. Pointed sticks against plasma cannons that could melt through a meter of reinforced steel in seconds, against force fields that could deflect asteroid impacts, against ships that could glass entire continents from orbit. Pointed sticks, Kethvor repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. And they use these against each other in warfare. According to our cultural analysis, yes, Admiral, they have an extensive history of warfare using such primitive implements. Sticks, rocks, sharp metals. They seem particularly proud of something they call guerrilla warfare, hiding in forests and mountains to attack with these crude weapons. The laughter intensified. Forest warfare with sticks. The Zephyrians could detect heat signatures from orbit, track individual organisms through atmospheric sensors, and eliminate entire ecosystems with precisely targeted energy weapons. What could these humans possibly do with their pointed sticks and chemical explosives? Very well, Admiral Kethvor decided, his mood brightened by the prospect of an easy conquest. We'll follow standard protocol. Make contact, demand surrender, and when they inevitably refuse with their primitive bravado, we'll demonstrate our superiority. I estimate complete subjugation within 7 planetary rotations. Shall I prepare the usual terms, Admiral? Conditional surrender, technological sharing agreements, resource allocation protocols? Actually, the Admiral mused, an idea forming in his strategic mind. Let's make this interesting. Their primitive nature might provide some entertainment for the crew. Instead of our usual orbital bombardment, let's conduct a ground campaign. Give them the illusion that they might have a chance with their sticks and stones. Subcommander Yixnelesse optical sensors widened in surprise. A ground campaign, Admiral, against primitives? Isn't that excessive? Think of it as training, Subcommander. Our ground forces have grown soft from too many easy orbital victories. Let them practice against these humans and their pointed sticks. What's the worst that could happen? We'll turn it into a case study on primitive warfare tactics for the Academy. The decision was unanimous among the senior staff. The Zephyrian Third Fleet would engage in ground operations against Earth, treating it as a live-fire training exercise. Their soldiers, equipped with energy weapons, personal shields, advanced armor, and tactical augmentation implants, would face humans armed with what their database described as sharpened wood and metal implements. As the fleet set course for the Sol system, the crew prepared for what they expected to be a brief and amusing campaign. The humans had achieved some basic spaceflight, yes, but they were still essentially Stone Age primitives compared to Zephyrian technology. The betting pools were already forming among the crew, with most wagering that human resistance would collapse within hours of first contact. What the Zephyrians couldn't understand from their sterile data analysis and technological superiority, was that humans had been perfecting the art of warfare for millennia. Every forest, every mountain, every urban sprawl on Earth was a classroom where humans had learned bitter lessons about survival, adaptation, and the creative use of limited resources against overwhelming odds. In the depths of space, as the Zephyrian fleet approached Earth, the third planet from Sol continued its ancient rotation, unaware that its inhabitants were about to face their greatest test. But humanity had faced seemingly impossible odds before, and each time they had found ways to turn their apparent weaknesses into devastating strengths. The Zephyrians saw pointed sticks and laughed. They were about to learn why human military academies still taught courses on the Vietnam War, the Afghan resistance, and countless other conflicts where technological superiority had met human ingenuity, determination, and an intimate understanding of home ground advantage. The war for Earth was about to begin, and while the aliens planned for a training exercise, humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about the difference between winning battles and winning wars. The emergency session at the United Nations had been called within hours of the first detection. Radio telescopes across the globe had picked up the signals simultaneously, massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system, moving at speeds that defied known physics. The ships were visible now even to ground-based optical telescopes, their hulls gleaming like silver daggers against the starfield. General Sarah Martinez stood at the head of the briefing room, her weathered face grim as she addressed the assembled world leaders via secure hologram. Behind her, a massive display showed the approaching fleet, 12 vessels, each roughly the size of an aircraft carrier but shaped like organic teardrops, their surfaces rippling with energy patterns that made human eyes water to look at directly. The entities have established a communication link, she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to relay. They call themselves the Zephyrian hegemony. They've given us 72 hours to surrender unconditionally or face what they term corrective action. President Chun of the Pacific Alliance leaned forward his chair. We're their demands. Complete technological subjugation. They want our scientific databases, our industrial capacity, and our population relocated to designated cultural preservation zones. In essence, they want to turn Earth into a museum while they strip mine our resources. The French president's hologram flickered as she spoke. And their technological capabilities? General Martinez nodded to her aide, who brought up a new display showing energy readings that made several participants whistle in disbelief. Their weapons systems are approximately 500 years ahead of ours, possibly more. Energy weapons, force field technology, faster than light travel. Against their main battle fleet, our conventional military would last maybe 6 hours. So we surrender, suggested the German chancellor. Live to fight another day. With respect, sir, General Martinez replied, analysis suggests that surrender would mean the end of human independence, possibly forever. These aren't conquerors looking for tribute. They're collectors. We become specimens in their galactic zoo. The silence stretched uncomfortably until an unexpected voice spoke up. Colonel James Bear Morrison, a grizzled veteran who'd spent 3 decades in special forces operations across 6 continents, cleared his throat from his position at the back of the room. General, if I may, when she nodded, he continued, I've been reviewing their transmission logs and preliminary tactical data. These aliens, they're used to conventional warfare, right? Fleet-to-fleet battles, orbital bombardment, overwhelming technological superiority. That appears to be their standard operating procedure, yes. And they're planning a ground invasion instead of just glassing us from orbit because General Martinez's expression shifted slightly. Intelligence suggests they view this as a training exercise. They find our technology so primitive that they want to use Earth as a live-fire practice range for their ground forces. Colonel Morrison's scarred face split into what might charitably be called a smile. They want to play soldiers with sticks and stones against humans? On Earth. That's one way to put it, Colonel. General, with all due respect to our distinguished leaders here, I think these aliens just made the biggest tactical error in galactic history. The room stirred with murmurs, but Morrison continued before anyone could interrupt. They're laughing at our pointed sticks, right? They think guerrilla warfare is some kind of primitive curiosity. Ma'am, these bastards have never faced an enemy that refused to play by their rules. President Santos of Brazil raised an eyebrow. Colonel, their technology can be neutralized. Morrison interrupted, his voice gaining confidence. Not destroyed, neutralized. Every piece of technology has weaknesses. Every army has supply lines. Every occupying force has to deal with local populations that know every rock, every tree, every back road in their territory. General Martinez looked intrigued despite herself. Explain. Their energy weapons need power sources. Their shields need generators. Their soldiers need food, water, air, rest. They're used to enemies who fight like they do. Big formations, conventional tactics, predictable responses. They've never faced an enemy that makes the rules instead of following them. Colonel Morrison moved to the tactical display, his hands dancing across the interface as he pulled up global topographical data. Look at this, people. We've got 7 continents, hundreds of thousands of cities, millions of square kilometers of wilderness. Mountains, forests, deserts, swamps, urban sprawls with underground networks they can't even imagine. The display shifted to show population distributions, infrastructure networks, and geographical features. Every human on this planet has grown up learning about warfare, even if they don't know it. We've got veterans from conflicts in every possible environment. We've got engineers who can build weapons from scrap metal and fertilizer. We've got hunters who can track and kill from distances these aliens never dreamed of. President Chun looked skeptical. Colonel, their armor, their shields, can be circumvented. General, what's the ambient temperature of their home world according to our analysis? General Martinez consulted her tablet. Approximately 15 degrees Celsius, with minimal variation. Very stable climate. Right. They're cold climate adapted. What happens when we make them fight in the Sahara? Or the Amazon rainforest during monsoon season? Or the Himalayas in winter? Their fancy armor might protect them from our bullets, but can it handle hypothermia? Heat stroke? Diseases they've never encountered. The room was listening now, the hopelessness that had dominated the early discussion giving way to something else. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, there was another way to look at this problem. Here's what I'm suggesting. Morrison continued, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who'd spent his life finding ways to win unwinnable fights. We don't try to match their technology. We don't fight their kind of war. We make them fight our war on our terms in our backyard. Guerrilla warfare, General Martinez said slowly. The most advanced guerrilla warfare campaign in human history. We use everything. Urban warfare, wilderness survival, asymmetric tactics, psychological operations. We hit their supply lines, their communications, their morale. We make them afraid to leave their bases. We turn their training exercise into their worst nightmare. Colonel Morrison looked around the room, meeting the eyes of world leaders who were beginning to understand what he was proposing. They're laughing at our pointed sticks, ladies and gentlemen. Let's show them what humans can do with pointed sticks when we're fighting for our home. The Zephyrian landing sites were chosen with typical alien efficiency. Flat terrain suitable for their drop ships, minimal civilian populations, strategic value for establishing supply lines. What they hadn't counted on was that humans had been preparing for 72 hours with the desperate creativity that only comes from facing extinction. Lieutenant Commander Vextor of the 3rd Assault Battalion was among the first to set foot on human soil, his polished boots touching down in what the humans called Nebraska, vast agricultural plains that stretched to the horizon. Perfect terrain for conventional military operations. His energy rifle hummed with contained power. His personal shields flickered almost invisibly around his tall frame, and his tactical display showed no immediate threats. Sector 7 secure. He reported to the command ship orbiting overhead. No sign of organized resistance. Proceeding with establishment of forward operating base Alpha. What Vextor couldn't see were the eyes watching him from concealed positions in the grain fields, from abandoned farm buildings, from storm drains, and root cellars that hadn't been used in decades. What his sophisticated sensors couldn't detect were the networks of buried fiber optic cables that farmers had been laying for the past 3 days, carrying signals between hidden observation posts. The first attack came not with the dramatic explosions the Zephyrians expected, but with something far more subtle and terrifying. Private soldier Klicksvin was on perimeter patrol when his energy pack simply died. Not damaged, not depleted, completely non-functional, as if something had systematically destroyed its quantum matrix from inside. Then, his personal shield failed. Then, his communications link went dead. Then, his tactical display started showing ghost images, phantom enemies where none existed, false terrain readings, corrupted data streams that made his head ache. Equipment malfunction in Sector 7 Delta. He reported through his backup communicator, but even though it was starting to produce static, requesting technical support and equipment replacement. But Private Klicksvin's problems were just beginning. As he tried to navigate back to base using manual direction finding, he discovered that every landmark had somehow changed. The road he'd walked down an hour earlier was blocked by fallen trees that hadn't been there before. The stream he'd crossed was suddenly 3 feet deeper and running much faster. The field markers that had clearly indicated direction were now turned around, pointing him toward what he was increasingly certain was the wrong direction. What he didn't know was that 37 humans were watching his every move from concealed positions, adjusting his environment in real time. The fallen trees were camouflaged barriers that had been pulled across the road after he passed. The stream had been temporarily dammed upstream and then released. The field markers had been rotated by teenagers on dirt bikes who could navigate the terrain blindfolded. But the real masterpiece was what was happening to his equipment. Dr. Sarah Kim, a Korean-American electronics engineer who'd been working on electromagnetic pulse research before the invasion, had spent 3 sleepless days developing what she called the Whisper, a low-power electromagnetic field generator that didn't destroy electronics, but slowly corrupted their functionality in ways that looked like random equipment failure. Every Zephyrian soldier was carrying sophisticated electronics that had never been tested against the specific electromagnetic signatures that Dr. Kim was broadcasting from hidden transmitters throughout the area. Their equipment wasn't breaking. It was being systematically driven insane. Meanwhile, in what had been downtown Denver, Staff Sergeant Kelvorth was discovering that urban warfare against humans was unlike anything in Zephyrian tactical manuals. The humans had vanished from the surface, but the city was far from empty. Sounds echoed from the underground. Footsteps, voices, machinery. But his sensors showed nothing definitive. Then the attacks began. Not frontal assaults with energy weapons or explosive charges, but something far more unnerving. Windows would shatter for no apparent reason, raining glass on a squad. Manholes would suddenly discharge clouds of noxious steam that didn't damage their armor, but fogged their visors and triggered respiratory alarms. Construction equipment would activate by itself, creating noise and confusion that interfered with their communications. "Sir," reported one of his subordinates, "I'm detecting movement in the subway tunnels, but the readings are inconsistent. Sometimes it shows dozens of life forms, sometimes nothing at all." "Investigate," Kelvorth ordered, though something about the situation was making his tactical instincts scream warnings. The subway tunnels beneath Denver had been transformed in 72 hours into something that would have impressed Vietnamese tunnel fighters. Local miners, construction workers, and urban explorers had worked around the clock to create a 3-dimensional maze of concealed passages, false walls, hidden chambers, and carefully constructed dead ends. When the Zephyrians descended into the tunnels, they found themselves in an environment where their technological advantages meant nothing. Their energy weapons couldn't penetrate the maze-like structure without causing collapses that would trap them. Their sensors were confused by carefully placed metallic debris and electronic noise generators. Their communications were blocked by the underground environment itself. And then the humans began to hunt. Marcus Rivera had been a police detective for 15 years before the invasion, specializing in tracking suspects through urban environments. Now he was leading a team of volunteers through tunnels they knew intimately, stalking aliens whose sophisticated equipment made them clumsy and overconfident in the underground environment. The humans moved through their tunnel network like ghosts, appearing just long enough to disable isolated soldiers with improvised weapons. Tranquilizer darts made from veterinary supplies, electromagnetic pulse grenades built from spare parts. Even simple deadfall traps that would have been familiar to hunters from centuries past. But more than the physical attacks, it was the psychological warfare that was breaking Zephyrian morale. Soldiers would find their equipment mysteriously moved, while they slept. Messages in their own language would appear spray-painted on walls. Messages that somehow knew classified information about their homeworlds, their families, their personal fears. The truth was that humans had been intercepting and decrypting Zephyrian communications from the moment they'd entered Earth's atmosphere. The aliens' encryption was sophisticated but followed logical patterns that human mathematicians and computer scientists have been trained to recognize. Every personal communication, every tactical order, every private moment of weakness was being analyzed and weaponized. Admiral Kethvor, watching the reports from orbit, felt the first stirrings of genuine concern. His forces weren't being destroyed. They were being degraded, demoralized, confused. Equipment failures were skyrocketing. Soldiers were requesting medical attention for stress-related disorders he'd never seen before. Most troubling of all, some units were simply disappearing. Not destroyed in dramatic battles, but vanishing completely, leaving behind only their equipment and increasingly frantic communication logs describing encounters with humans who seemed to melt away like smoke whenever pursued. "Sub-Commander," he addressed Yixnel, "what's our tactical assessment of human resistance?" "It's difficult to categorize, Admiral," she replied, her tentacles betraying nervous movement. "They're not engaging in conventional warfare. Our soldiers report contact, but when they respond with overwhelming force, there's nothing there. It's as if they're fighting shadows. Casualties, minimal fatalities, but psychological trauma is severe. Many soldiers are reporting that they feel constantly watched, constantly hunted. Some are refusing to leave base perimeters." Admiral Kethvor stared at the tactical display, trying to understand how primitives with pointed sticks were making his advanced military forces afraid to venture into human territory. The reports didn't make sense according to any tactical framework he understood. He was about to learn that humans had been perfecting the art of making superior forces afraid for thousands of years, and they'd had 72 hours to prepare for the most important guerrilla campaign in the history of their species. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a 7-day training exercise, Admiral Kethvor stood before a holographic display that showed the impossible. His technologically superior forces controlled exactly 0% of human territory. They held their landing sites and nothing else. "Explain this to me," he demanded, his 6 eyes focusing on Sub-Commander Yixnel with predatory intensity. "How are primitives with pointed sticks preventing our forces from establishing territorial control?" Yixnel's report was unlike anything in Zephyrian military history. "Admiral, the humans aren't fighting us according to any recognizable tactical doctrine. When we advance, they disappear. When we retreat, they appear everywhere at once. When we establish defensive positions, they somehow attack us from directions that shouldn't exist." The latest incident report was particularly disturbing. A full platoon of Zephyrian soldiers had been stationed in what humans called the Rocky Mountains, tasked with establishing a monitoring post on a strategic peak. They'd arrived to find the position apparently abandoned. No humans, no weapons, no technology beyond primitive weather monitoring equipment. But then, the environment itself had become hostile. Their equipment had begun malfunctioning in ways that defied analysis. Energy readings fluctuated wildly. Gravitational sensors reported impossible readings, as if the mountain itself was somehow heavier in some places than others. Communications with orbital command became intermittent, then impossible. Then the avalanches started. Not random geological events, but precisely timed cascades of snow and rock that isolated individual soldiers, destroyed supply caches, and blocked evacuation routes. When the survivors finally called for emergency extraction, they reported something that made seasoned military analysts question their sanity. The humans had somehow weaponized an entire mountain. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more terrifying than the Zephyrians could imagine. The humans hadn't weaponized the mountain. They'd made friends with it. Local ski patrol members, search and rescue specialists, geologists, and mountaineers had spent 3 weeks turning their intimate knowledge of alpine environments into a tactical advantage. They knew which slopes would avalanche under specific conditions. They knew how radio waves bounced off certain rock formations. They knew that Zephyrian equipment, designed for temperate climates, would malfunction at high altitude in ways that the aliens would attribute to environmental factors rather than human sabotage. Most importantly, They knew that the aliens would think like aliens, expecting human resistance to come in the form of direct confrontation rather than environmental manipulation on a scale that required generational knowledge of local terrain. But the Mountain Campaign was just one front in a global war that was reshaping everything the galaxy thought it knew about military science. In the Amazon rainforest, Zephyrian forces were facing something that their tactical computers couldn't even categorize. Captain Wexkill's mission had seemed straightforward: establish a resource extraction point near what humans called the Brazil-Peru border. The area was sparsely populated, rich in valuable minerals, and far from major human population centers. His force of 200 soldiers should have been able to secure the area within hours. Instead, they were dying, not from energy weapons or explosive devices, but from things that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their environmental suits. Insects that somehow carried toxins specifically designed to interact with Zephyrian biology. Plants that release spores, causing hallucinations and disorientation. Water sources that looked pure, but contained microscopic organisms that turned their digestive systems into biological warfare laboratories. How are they doing this? Captain Wexkill demanded of his science officer as another soldier was evacuated with symptoms that resembled nothing in their medical databases. The humans appear to have enlisted the entire ecosystem as a biological weapon, the science officer replied, his voice betraying confusion and fear. It's as if every plant, every animal, every microorganism has been programmed to attack us specifically. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that the humans hadn't programmed anything. They'd simply asked for help from people who'd spent their entire lives learning how to use the rainforest's natural defenses. Dr. Maria Esperanza, an ethnobotanist who'd worked with indigenous tribes for 20 years, had spent 3 weeks organizing the most sophisticated biological warfare campaign in human history. She hadn't created new weapons. She'd simply taught urban volunteers how to recognize and deploy the countless natural defenses that tribal peoples had been using for millennia. The insects weren't modified. They were native species whose behavior had been carefully channeled towards Zephyrian positions using pheromone lures and habitat manipulation. The plants weren't engineered. They were common rainforest species whose natural toxins had been concentrated and deployed by people who'd learned their properties from traditional medicine practitioners. Most devastating of all was the psychological impact. Zephyrian soldiers, accustomed to fighting in sterile environments with clearly defined threats, found themselves in a world where everything was potentially hostile. They couldn't eat the food, drink the water, touch the plants, or even breathe the air without constant filtration and purification. Meanwhile, human children were playing games 50 meters away from Zephyrian patrols, completely unaffected by environmental factors that were incapacitating alien soldiers. But it was in the urban environments that the true scope of human adaptation became apparent. The Battle of London had begun when Zephyrian forces attempted to establish administrative control over what they considered a strategically important human population center. They'd expected either resistance or submission from the 8 million humans in the metropolitan area. What they found instead was something that broke their understanding of how civilized societies functioned under occupation. The humans had simply vanished. Not fled, vanished. 8 million people had somehow become invisible to Zephyrian sensors while remaining physically present in the city. They went to work, maintained infrastructure, conducted business, raised families, and lived completely normal lives in a city that their sensors said was empty. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Nextal from a patrol in what had been Piccadilly Circus, "the city is functioning normally. Traffic lights work, public transportation runs on schedule, power grid is stable, telecommunications are operational. But our sensors detect no human life signs. None at all. Sir, I'm watching humans walk past me right now. Hundreds of them. But our equipment insists they don't exist." The truth was that London had become the testing ground for the most advanced urban camouflage system ever developed. Dr. Alan Turing Singh, a specialist in electromagnetic warfare at Cambridge University, had realized that Zephyrian sensors relied on specific frequency patterns to detect human biological signatures. Working with volunteers across the city, he distributed simple devices, modified from cell phone components and radio equipment, that broadcast precisely tuned interference signals. Not powerful enough to damage Zephyrian equipment, but specific enough to make human life signs invisible to their sensors. Every person in London was carrying what looked like a slightly modified mobile phone, but was actually a personal cloaking device. The city hadn't emptied. It had simply learned how to hide from alien sensors while remaining completely visible to human eyes. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was devastating. They were stationed in a functioning city filled with millions of invisible humans who could see them perfectly, but remained completely undetectable. Every street corner might hide observers. Every building might contain resistance fighters. Every sound might indicate imminent attack. But they couldn't fight what they couldn't find, and they couldn't find what had learned to hide in plain sight. Admiral Keth Vor stared at the reports streaming in from every theater of operations around the planet. His forces weren't being defeated. They were being systematically driven insane by an enemy that refused to fight fair, refused to follow tactical doctrine, and refused to accept that technological superiority determined the outcome of warfare. "How many casualties?" he asked grimly. 17 killed in action, Subcommander Yixnell reported. But over 3,000 psychological evacuations. Another 800 requesting immediate transfer to non-combat positions. And, sir, some units are refusing orders to engage human positions. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The mighty Zephyrian military, conqueror of 47 worlds, was being broken by primitives who fought with sticks, stones, and apparently unlimited creativity in making superior technology irrelevant. "Sir," Yixnell continued hesitantly, "the humans have sent another communication. Terms for surrender? No, sir. They're offering to teach us guerrilla warfare tactics in exchange for peaceful withdrawal. They seem to think we might find it educational." Admiral Keth Vor realized, with growing horror, that the humans weren't just winning. They were offering to teach their enemies how they were winning, confident that even with that knowledge, the Zephyrians would never be able to replicate what humans could do when fighting for their home. The surrender came not with dramatic explosions or desperate final battles, but with a simple transmission from Admiral Keth Vor to Earth's makeshift command center in an abandoned coal mine beneath Colorado. We wish to discuss terms for withdrawal." General Martinez, speaking from a location the Zephyrians still couldn't pinpoint despite having orbital surveillance capabilities, responded with characteristic human directness. "Admiral, you're welcome to leave any time you want. We're not holding you here." The silence that followed lasted for nearly a minute, an eternity in military communications. "General," the Admiral finally continued, his translator struggling with concepts that apparently had no equivalent in Zephyrian, "we need assurance that your forces will allow our withdrawal. We require safe passage." From her position in the command center, surrounded by equipment that ranged from cutting-edge quantum computers to 100-year-old vacuum tube radios, General Martinez exchanged glances with Colonel Morrison. The grizzled Special Forces veteran was trying very hard not to smile. "Admiral," she replied, "you're asking the people you came to conquer for permission to leave? I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly." Another long pause. When Keth Vor spoke again, his voice carried something that human listeners were beginning to recognize as profound humiliation mixed with genuine fear. "General, our forces cannot locate your military installations. We cannot predict your attack patterns. We cannot maintain equipment functionality in your operational areas. Our soldiers are experiencing psychological trauma from fighting an enemy they cannot see, cannot understand, and cannot defeat. We no longer comprehend how warfare functions on your world." What the Admiral didn't say, but what every human listening understood, was that the Zephyrian military machine was breaking down in ways that had nothing to do with casualties or equipment losses. They were facing something that their entire military doctrine insisted couldn't exist, an enemy that made technological superiority irrelevant through sheer creativity and intimate knowledge of home territory. Dr. Kim's electromagnetic warfare teams had evolved beyond simple equipment disruption. Working with physicists from universities around the world, they created localized fields that made Zephyrian technology not just unreliable, but actively self-defeating. Energy weapons that fired backwards. Shields that amplified incoming damage instead of deflecting it. Communications equipment that played practical jokes on its operators. The alien sophisticated AI systems designed to process conventional tactical scenarios, were having nervous breakdowns trying to analyze human behavior that followed no recognizable military logic. In the Amazon, Dr. Esperanza's biological warfare specialists had achieved something that military historians would study for generations. They'd convinced an entire ecosystem to fight a war. Zephyrian soldiers couldn't eat, drink, breathe, or sleep without constant medical intervention. Every tree, every stream, every breath of air had become a potential weapon. The mountain warfare specialists had gone beyond even their own expectations, turning entire geographic regions into tactical weapons. Zephyrian forces would arrive to find that valleys had somehow changed shape overnight, that streams now flowed uphill, that compasses pointed in directions that didn't correspond to any magnetic field their sensors could detect. But it was the urban warfare that had truly broken Zephyrian morale. 8 million Londoners living their daily lives while remaining completely invisible to alien sensors had created a level of psychological pressure that military psychiatrists were calling unprecedented. Zephyrian soldiers stationed in London were requesting hazard pay for being surrounded by millions of invisible humans who might or might not be planning to attack at any moment. The thing is, Admiral, General Martinez continued, we never wanted to fight you in the first place. You came here, laughed at our pointed sticks, and decided to use our home as target practice. Now you're discovering that there's a difference between advanced technology and battlefield effectiveness. Colonel Morrison leaned toward his microphone. Admiral, if I may, your military has probably conquered dozens of worlds using the same playbook, demonstrate technological superiority, demand surrender, overwhelm any resistance with orbital bombardment. Am I right? That is accurate. And it's worked because you've been fighting enemies who play by the same rules you do. Ship-to-ship combat, conventional formations, predictable tactics. You've never faced an enemy that refused to acknowledge your technological superiority as relevant. The colonel's voice took on the tone of a teacher explaining something fundamental to a confused student. Admiral, humans have been perfecting irregular warfare for thousands of years. We've been turning disadvantages into advantages since we first picked up those pointed sticks you found so amusing. Every piece of technology you brought to Earth, we found ways to make it work against you. From orbit, Admiral Kethvor stared at the blue planet below, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. His forces controlled their landing sites, and nothing else. Human resistance hadn't been crushed. It had evolved, adapted, grown stronger every day. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Nothing, Admiral, General Martinez replied. We want you to leave and never come back. But more than that, we want you to take a message to your hegemony and any other species that might be watching. She paused, choosing her words carefully for what she knew would become the most important diplomatic communication in human history. Earth is a small, blue planet on the outer rim of an unremarkable galaxy. Our technology is primitive by galactic standards. Our weapons are laughable compared to energy cannons and force fields. Our space flight is barely beyond chemical rockets. But this is our home, and we know every inch of it better than you will ever know anything in your lives. The transmission was being recorded not just by Zephyrian receivers, but by listening posts throughout the solar system. Every intelligence agency on Earth understood that this message would be broadcast across the galaxy. We don't want to conquer anyone. We don't want to build an empire. We don't want to be a threat to peaceful neighbors. But if you come to our world with hostile intent, you'll discover that humans are very, very good at making superior forces regret their life choices. Colonel Morrison added his own postscript. Admiral, your tactical computers are probably trying to analyze how primitives with pointed sticks defeated advanced military technology. Here's the answer. We didn't defeat your technology. We ignored it. We made it irrelevant. We fought a different war than the one you came prepared for. And next time, General Martinez concluded, we'll be even better at it. The Zephyrian withdrawal took 3 days and was accomplished with a precision that spoke to their eagerness to leave Earth's atmosphere. As their ships accelerated toward the edge of the solar system, they left behind something unprecedented in their military history, a complete tactical defeat at the hands of species they dismissed as primitive. But they also left with something unexpected, a profound respect for human ingenuity and a story that would spread throughout the galaxy. The species that laughed at pointed sticks had learned that human warfare wasn't about the sticks, it was about the minds that wielded them. Within a year, the battle for Earth had become required study at military academies across 3 sectors of the galaxy. Not as an example of technological advancement, but as a case study in how creativity, adaptation, and home field advantage could overcome any technological disparity. And on Earth, humanity looked to the stars with new confidence. They were still the species with pointed sticks, but they'd proven something important. Sometimes pointed sticks, wielded by minds that refused to accept defeat, could be more effective than all the energy weapons in the galaxy. The universe had laughed at humanity's primitive weapons. Now, the universe was taking notes on human military doctrine and hoping never to face it in actual combat. As Colonel Morrison noted in his after-action report, turns out the galaxy wasn't ready for guerrilla warfare taught by a species that invented it, perfected it, and had been practicing it on each other for thousands of years. Who knew?